Good. Hi everyone, my name is Francesca and I head up the marketing team at Mantle Network, which is essentially an Ethereum layer 2, the first ever initiated by a DAO. So speaking of DAOs, the debate on DAOs is a big one and it continues throughout several years. And depending really on who you speak to, DAOs can either be a revolutionary concept set to define the utopia of what could be a virtual leaderless organization of the future, or on the polarizing end, a dystopian, dysfunctional construct, not my words, some people say that, fraught with existential and perhaps even a self-existential challenge. But lucky for me, I'm really not the one put in the hot seat today, having to answer some of these greatest debates surrounding the wonderful world of DAOs. Introducing my panel of speakers right here, representing Game 7 and EduDAO, we have John, and SparkDAO, co-founder himself, Josh. Very nice to have you here. Founder of Hyperplay, as well as the author of the Mantle, the first version of the Mantle proposal, Jacob, as well as the head of ecosystem for Mantle, Arjun. Very good to have you all here. So I'd like to first start off with, good old round of introduction, as well as kind of linking to, your perspective from the organizations that you represent. What do you see are the biggest challenges facing the growth and sustainability of Web3 ecosystems today? Starting with you, John.
Yeah, happy to kick things off. Appreciate the kind introduction, Fran. I think some of the biggest issues in my, kind of thinking from a first principles perspective, is really how do you get engaged, positive contribution to these Web3 communities? I think a lot of people have tried various token models, and if you launch a token, then hopefully you have this decentralized community that spontaneously comes together and things just happen. I think we've realized that oftentimes that doesn't just happen. So you really have to be thoughtful. And so coming up with these novel frameworks or different ways of coordinating or tools or variety of tools pieced together is something that both Game 7 and EduDAO have been thinking about very deeply. And so I think that's been really kind of the fun part, where it's like, how do you create a framework that's loose enough to evolve and flex with the community that's participating to really fully utilize what DAO should be, which is optimizing for community contribution. So I think that's really the biggest struggle, is like, how do you have that framework that is also, allows people to participate in that, but also is a shape to the community and is not too structured and rigid, so that people can not make changes and evolve with the skill sets and kind of people who are participating.
Sounds good. Over to you, Josh.
Thank you. I think there's a finite amount of attention that can be captured among everyone, right? And with SparkDAO, what we've done is we've designed a very long tail. We've designed our tokenomics to expire, the Genesis to expire in 2032. And when you're playing these long-term games, it's harder to compete for attention with people who are just giving out tokens. It's like, hey, look at my airdrop. Come claim these. Come mint this free NFT. And so in this vacuum, I think that would be one of the bigger challenges. And I think the second side of that is making the decision in design choices. A lot has to be designed around compliance. And you make this decision, should we do things incredibly compliant? What is the structure we should set up? With SparkDAO, we chose a Colorado cooperative, which is deep in the US infrastructure of yes, we're going to comply to the letter of the law, which then disables us from being able to do some of the Ponzi-nomic things that a lot of other projects in the ecosystem are accustomed to, like liquidity mining and trying to rent community. And I think on the longer tail, it'll benefit us. But in the short term, we have things like ETH Denver to keep people excited.
Jacob.
Yeah, so I think the traditional corporate model is not fit for not fit for unleashing the innovation of everything that's possible today. And we've seen generally crises of ownership, crises of alignment of the incentives between the communities that use products versus the communities that build products. And part of what I was really excited about when I joined the BitDAO ecosystem is this was a DAO that had this vision of fractal growth, where there could be a DAO that would join together with other external projects, create other DAOs or autonomous entities or new companies, and use tokens to create incentive alignment. So the BitDAO has its own token, Bit, and that in our Treasury has been used to join with other DAOs or other projects in the ecosystem. So to illustrate this in a really concrete way, BitDAO and Forte, one of the most respected and major Web3 game development projects, joined together to create Game 7, which is a DAO that is focused on accelerating sustainable Web3 gaming infrastructure. And that DAO went on to form another project, which I'm the founder of, called Hyperplay, which is a Web3 native game launcher that allows players to carry their MetaMask or Wallet Connect wallet into native or browser games, sort of like a Steam for Web3. And then Hyperplay was actually a collaboration of Game 7 and MetaMask. And then now in Hyperplay, we're working with some other external protocols I'm not ready to announce yet, but you can see these waves of fractal growth and incentive alignment between the different layers of the DAOs all the way down. So, we are launching features that are related to Hyperplay on the Mantle L2, who Fran leads the community for. And we're seeing this ecosystem of fractal growth and many different organizations which have autonomy of action so that they can build products. I mean, we built Hyperplay in like 6 months. If you had tried to do that in a traditional corporation, the bureaucracy of it wouldn't have been capable of doing that. But the autonomy of action of the DAO structure allows people to take initiative in a way that you couldn't in regular structures. And yet BitDAO is an organization with a multi-billion-dollar treasury that's able to deploy this in a much more effective way than traditional capital allocation and traditional and inefficient forms of capital. So I'm really excited about creating new forms of structure and governance that benefit community, that regenerate society, that are ethical business models that are both sustainable and that empower the communities and redistribute ownership. So those are the reasons I'm here.
Got it. No, that was those were some pretty interesting. So those are some pretty interesting points there, Jacob, and this is interesting for me because at Mantle we run a chain which is run by a DAO, right? So the DAO gets to make decisions in the in the way we want to shape the blockchain. Now the problem is that you've got some super technical discussions which very few people could maybe understand or fathom or be able to take a decision on, and then you've got business decisions in which you may not be able to, let's say, talk about all the different details involved, right? So we want the community to be involved in decision making for the blockchain, but how do we involve the community in which kind of decision? And when we do this is kind of a bit of a challenge, right? And this is not unique to what we've seen at Mantle, right? So we've actually seen this before. And if you see like the governance models of protocols like Synthetics, you will see that Synthetics has got a DAO, but then they have this subcommittee, right, where you can like go and take certain decisions. If you look at, let's say, ApeCoin has this voting system where you sort of vote people to the Ape Council who can then take certain decisions. So, I'm seeing different kinds of governance models evolve in different types of DAOs. And this is kind of what I'm trying to learn from the ecosystem, because these entities are very operational in nature. Like, they need to get stuff done. Like Synthetics needs to build products. The Ape community or Yuga Labs needs to ship games, right? And we need to build an ecosystem and deploy a chain. So the problems are operational in nature, and what kind of, and how you maintain information symmetry in this kind of a construct where the community feels involved, that there is collective ownership and collective responsibility. But at the same time, we're able to operationally achieve all the results, right, and deliver on time. Like for me, this is like a tough challenge, because like even basic stuff, right? Like you have proposals, people won't vote on proposals, right? And then you need to like follow up, and vote, etc. And this is super important for me because if the proposal doesn't get voted, then we can't take a decision. So I think like nimbler governance structures, which help you solve operational problems, are something which have to evolve, right? And like I said, not everybody should take every decision. Maybe people should take certain types of decisions, whether technical or business, whatever have you, and then you evolve like a governance model like that. So that's kind of like these are the things I'm learning from the ecosystem, from different governance models. Yeah, it's a pretty exciting time, and hopefully we'll figure out something which works really well for us as well. So yeah.
Arjun, I'd love to dive a little bit deeper to what you talked about because you provide a perfect segue into the topic for today, which is building a sustainable Web3 ecosystem with 2 Treasury solutions. So when you talk about kind of like having that technical layer of decisions as well as the business side of things, how do you think the Web3 ecosystem can be optimized by separating these responsibilities, first on the infrastructure building as well as the ecosystem development side of things? And Arjun, as soon as you're done, I'd love to hear your perspective as well, Josh.
No, sure, definitely. So this is interesting, right? So we've been talking about this model for almost 4 or 5 months now, right? So if you go on YouTube, you can see the discussion around separation of technology and ecosystem. Interestingly, this is exactly what even Coinbase is doing, right? So Coinbase is now working with OP Collective, where Coinbase will do ecosystem stuff and the OP Collective will do the technology stuff, right? And interestingly, OP Collective have their own DAO, which is powered by the OP token, right? So those guys can take technical decisions, while maybe Coinbase can take business decisions, right? So in some sense, it validates the model, which we've been proponents of for a while. Even at a blockchain level, at Mantle, we want to have the same system because we understand not everybody can take deep technical decisions on, like, let's say, roll-up technology or data availability. And similarly, not everybody could take best ecosystem decisions, right? So you need to have parties who understand these different things take those decisions, right? Very similar to how governments operate, where let's say the department which is responsible for, let's say, building infrastructure will not take decisions related to homeland security, right? That's somebody else's purview. So just like in governments, you have specific, let's say, think tanks or departments which take certain decisions. You need to have the same thing in blockchain, where technical decisions, maybe certain financial decisions, maybe ecosystem decisions have to be taken by different parties, all collaborating with each other for mutual value creation. So this is kind of what I feel is a sign of things to come. And yeah, I'd love to see how you guys are doing that at Spock.
The only thing I'd want to add to that is putting a label on it, and that's we've created a system of separation of powers, which I think is just good governance.
Sounds good. So let's talk a little bit about resource allocation and kind of the goal of achieving mass adoption for Web3 technology. And I'd love to hear about this from the gaming point of view. So first of all, to Jacob, with the current kind of number of on-chain Web3 participants, still kind of in the single-digit millions, what new approaches do you think are needed to optimize those 2 goals? For resource allocation as well as achieving mass adoption?
So I think there's some pretty, the typical corporate business model, for example, or an allocation model, often pits the shareholders of a corporation who often have short-term interests and who don't have incentives that are aligned with the long-term growth and sustainability of the companies that they invest in. And they often pressure those companies to do things for short-term capital returns that are not long-term sustainable. And one of the things that a lot of projects, for example, and I think that John should probably speak about this a little bit more, we're looking at building things like reputation protocols, where those who contribute the most, they have a greater say in the governance of a thing. Those who are closest to building a problem, they have a greater insight into how to create value around and solve different problems. And so in the BitDAO ecosystem, we've had inside of one of the autonomous entities of BitDAO, there's Game 7, which is building a protocol called Summon, It's a protocol that's launching features on our Mantle layer 2, and that is a reputation protocol that incentivizes community engagement, community idea and ideation and contributions, developer contributions, all the way to gameplay and activity and games and fun. And bringing all of those things and taking the people who really are using our products, taking the people who are really building our products and giving them a greater voice in the development and roadmap and navigation of the product rather than short-term speculation. This creates a greater incentive alignment between builders and our communities and also, you know, and the larger Bit community around that token.
John, I'd love to hear your view. Tell us a little bit more about Summon as well.
Yeah, so happy to unpack. I mean, like Jacob mentioned Summon. I mean, this is something that I've been spending a lot of time on and thinking about, and I think it's kind of this amalgamation of a lot of the kind of issues that I've had in a lot of the past and current kind of DAO communities that I've been a part of. Like Jacob mentioned, I think really when you think about what the core thing that you need for a successful DAO community is, you need positive contribution. And so a lot of these other things that you're stacking on top and people are doing in DAO tools are really kind of missing that core point, where you need people who are actually positively contributing. And a lot of DAOs start, they'll launch a token, and you're kind of hoping that those initial people who get that token oftentimes cheap or maybe free from an airdrop or something will continue to work and be aligned with the DAO to ensure success for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But if you have a very complex community, people sometimes are no longer interested. And so what we've done is we started developing this platform that Jacob mentioned. It's called Summon. And what it allows is you to have a soul-bound NFT that can basically meet your community where you are. You can easily make these tasks and quests, and you can earn XP, and you can level up based on the different engagement that you do on different platforms. It's extremely platform agnostic, but it makes this really nice unified experience for organizing your DAO. So Game 7 is really trialing this kind of experiment, which I think just to tack on, I'm a huge fan of how BitDAO has so much breadth, and it's able to have all of these experiments to really expedite the DAO community at large. That's one of the reasons why I was so excited to be an active member in that community. You have Game 7 who's trying the meritocratic angle, and they're saying, based on your engagement, you should have more or less say, you should have more or less access and influence and stature in the community. But what's kind of cool is once you have this core primitive for a meritocratic governance model, you can start to hybridize that with a liquid token. And I kind of like to think about it like a spectrum. You have some DAOs who are like, I only care about your economic contribution, I don't really care about your engagement. On the other hand, you say, I don't care anything about your economic contribution, I only care what you're actually doing for the DAO. But when you combine those two, you start to realize that, I would say, being a spectrum, I would say that all communities fit somewhere on that spectrum, where it's like maybe I care 70-30, right, or 50-50, and you can have this really interesting balance. And what's kind of cool is maybe you release a token and you realize that it's really lopsided to begin with. If you start to introduce something like Summon, and you start to add vote weights as a multiplier to this base liquid economic token, you can start to shift the balance to people who are actually more active contributors in your DAO. And I think it fixes a lot of these kind of like early problems or midterm problems that people run into because of the $1, one token, one vote model that most DAOs are currently using.
So I'm hearing a lot of kind of engagement, participation, and community being central to many of these DAO systems. Josh, from your perspective, how do you drive this kind of community engagement, and how can people get involved in a DAO ecosystem?
That's a good question. I think empowerment and designing tokenomics to incentivize people to be empowered and then to exercise the power that you've given them. So for example, in SporkDAO, it controls, owns, whatever word you want to use, ETH Denver, right? It's the DAO that runs ETH Denver. And if there's something that you don't like about ETH Denver, or there's something that you'd like to see improve next year, you're empowered via this DAO to exercise that. For attending, you got 52.8, sponsors get a bunch of Spork, buying merch. There's a lot of different things that you can do throughout the ecosystem to try to increase your voting power, right? And we encourage people to provide that feedback to help improve the event.
Sounds good. And I do appreciate that there are different levels, different tiers of participation. So from a BitDAO perspective, and this is an open question to any one of you, how do we encourage participation within the BitDAO ecosystem?
So I think so it's interesting, right? So when you, for example, take a DAO, right, and you throw, let's say, a token into the mix, like what happens with Spoke and with some of the other DAOs, you can then create like some level of incentive alignment, right? Now, the problem with incentive alignment also is that at some point it can become purely about incentives, right? Versus really wanting to solve a problem or possible real kind of like, mission-based engagement. So it's a very fine balance there. For example, like if I were to take BitDAO's example, right? Now, BitDAO has a bunch of investments. There's Mantle, which is an infrastructure piece, which has got a different problem to solve. There is Game 7, which is focused on game tooling. There is EduDAO, which is focused on education. ZK-DAO is focused on ZK. These DAOs can also spawn more DAOs, like we've seen with Hyperplay. So at every level, there are a different set of incentives and different objectives, and different kinds of people who might be involved in these kind of structures, right? So what is pretty clear is that you cannot have one single incentive scheme which sort of encompasses all of this. So this is not a smart contract problem, right? This is more of a execution and goal problem. And goals could also change. For example, Game 7's goals could change depending on how the gaming industry changes. So the way I see it is that if you want real participation, I think first thing, you got to solve real problems, right? You got to solve problems which the community is passionate about. Not what you want to solve, but what the world needs to solve, right? And that's when you get mission orientation. Like you got people who are involved in the mission, right? And then whatever incentive scheme you come up with has to be aligned to that mission, right? So this is not about, like, for example, like, we as human beings, right? We have some goal in life, something we want to do, right? To achieve that goal, we do certain things. Like, some of us take up jobs, maybe some start a business, like others do other things. But essentially, it's a means for us to achieve or do what we want to do, right? There's a mission somewhere. And I think if you can define that mission for the DAO and then align incentives in such a way, that's, I feel, when things become like successful. So this is how like at BitDAO, for example, we want to think, where each body has their own mission, and find people who are passionate about solving or being a part of that mission, and then align incentives accordingly, right? Where mission takes priority, right? And incentives enable that mission. So I think that's like a more organic or maybe a better way of getting people involved in, like, whatever you might want to build, right? Whether it's a company, whether it's a chain, whether it's a DAO or whatever have you. So, yeah.
Right. So unfortunately, we're almost out of time. So as a final question, and this is addressed to each and every one of you, DAOs right now are clearly having a moment in this very thriving kind of ecosystem and the territory that we operate in. But is it ready to go mainstream? And this is a question I guess we'll start with you, John, for your perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I won't go too much into, I think it is very easy, kind of segues into something like Summon, right? Or a lot of these different products or engagement tools or things that we're trialing and testing. I think we're still very early days. I think to kind of like back up a little bit, a lot of people like to compare this to, this model is going to take on, corporations, right? Or these traditional centralized models. It's kind of interesting to me because it's very reminiscent of back when I was, talking to these like large corporations back in 2016, 17 and building products and kind of consulting for them, that a lot of them didn't fundamentally understand and were getting really bad information about the trade-offs between a centralized database and a blockchain. There are things that a blockchain is very good at. And it's when you want to optimize for that primitive trust, or when you lack trust and you have an adversarial environment. Most centralized companies don't have that, and a centralized database would be much more efficient. I think the same exact conversations right now are happening with DAOs. Almost everyone is like, let's just call, this X DAO, Y DAO, right? We can just DAOify everything. But then a lot of people don't actually want to run a DAO. They want to have a committee, they want to make decisions, and they don't want to actually like put in the work and effort to open it up to the public, to actually build the tools and build the governance systems, to let it be a grassroots, ground-up movement where people actually have say and influence and can actually shape the direction of the DAO. And so I think that's my biggest point, is just when people are thinking about building a DAO, it's like, do you actually want to just build a Web3 focused company? and keep it centralized, or do you really want to put in the work and effort to do a DAO? I think we still have a decent way there, but it's just fantastic seeing all the people at ETH Denver, and all the phenomenal people in the BitDAO community who are putting in the work and effort, I think, to do some interesting experiments to further this. So I think we're getting there, but is it like, hey, turnkey, everyone should join one, everyone can do one? Like, no, but I think the people who are sitting here today, putting the effort for communities and DAOs, building tools, trying to engage the community, we're well on our way, which is great to see.
That was a pretty good answer. The only thing I'd want to add to that is yes, no, and it depends. So I think DAOs are ready for certain things, and I don't think they're ready for other things. So we're talking about replacing entire governments, probably not. Replacing smaller parts of what smaller departments do, probably. Managing smaller products, managing a massive event like this, yeah, DAOs are definitely ready. So it depends.
Yeah, so I think that as a general whole, the DAO ecosystem is still pretty immature. The earliest DAOs, like if we go back to the DAO, I mean, it ended pretty spectacularly in a hack that lost a lot of funds, and then we can go forward to smaller DAO experiments like the Moloch DAOs and the other DAOs that came out of that, and those were really like built around the rage quit mechanism. They're meant for a small group of friends to invest in things. They're high trust environments. They typically don't have a particularly large treasuries, but they were really important to validating the DAO model and doing so in a way that was really experimental for small groups. Now, if we fast forward to the current period, we have protocol DAOs that are governing things like Uniswap. We have we have various different protocol DAOs, and then part of what's so important about BitDAO is that this is the first DAO of its size and treasury that's actually deploying things and building multiple products. I don't think that there's any DAO of this type that has existed on this scale, and also it's revealed to us through our work that there's a lot of things that are still like really hard to do and super difficult. I mean, even just things like our DAO participating in the governance of third-party protocols and managing our treasury. These are like super hard problems that a private company could just like make their CFO do or something. So we're by building in the way that we are, we're forcing ourselves to make the DAO ecosystem more mature and hopefully progressively decentralizing. And there's certainly things that we want to increasingly decentralize over time. I think that BitDAO maybe doesn't meet the levels of decentralization of some other DAOs, but as we have a serious commitment to progressive decentralization and community empowerment, and we're constantly moving things in a direction that makes the DAO ecosystem more mature, makes the DAO ecosystem more decentralized, and that empowers things around the other autonomous entities and DAOs that we've created.
No, definitely makes sense. Ultimately, I think mentioning what Josh was also saying, that not everything needs to be a DAO, right? So DAOs are good at solving certain types of problems, right? Just like how blockchain technology is good at solving a certain class of problems. So I do feel that there are structures out there, or rather problems, which are better solved with maybe a centralized setup, while there are certain problems which are very elegantly solved by a decentralized setup, or possibly operating like a DAO. I think identifying where a DAO's strengths sort of come out makes like the most sense. So like what Jacob was saying, there are many DAOs which have done successful investments, right? Simply because you were able to sort of operate with the intelligence of multiple perspectives, right? Which even many big funds are not able to do, right? And they were able to make successful investments. So I think it depends on the use case. Now, could we expand the kind of problems you could solve with a DAO? Yes. But those are again subject to developments in governance, right? So this actually is exactly how governments operate, where governments are good at solving certain problems and the private industry is good at solving certain problems. In situations where the government solves all problems, like we've seen in possibly, let's say, a more communist socialist style of thinking, versus a type of governance where just the private sector solves all the problems. Like we see in completely capitalist societies, we kind of see that that's not what really works, right? So governance can solve certain problems, governance cannot solve certain problems. Our ability to identify and evolve governance will then allow us to solve more problems. So that's kind of how it is. So I think identifying where the strengths of decentralized governance, collective ownership, and most importantly, collective responsibility come, that's kind of where you would want to like set up a DAO. And I think that's kind of where DAOs also succeed. So not everything should be a DAO, but a lot of things can be as long as we get the governance right.
Very practical advice there. And with that, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. A big thank you to our panel, and you guys have been great. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Francesca. It's been a pleasure being with you today. Till next time.
Thank you.